The ancient Greeks, in particular, had great struggles. It was a hot topic of debate. On one side were the atomists, who believed that space could be separated into infinitely divisible points. One of the real troublemakers of early Greek philosophy, Zeno, challenged this view with a series of paradoxes. Ancient Greek historian at University College London, Professor Bob Sharples, explains the most famous of these, Achilles versus the tortoise.
Achilles, being a swift runner, as he was proverbially in Homer, and being a kind and generous person, which is less obvious in Homer, is having for some bizarre reason a race with a tortoise, and sportingly says he'll give the tortoise a start. When Achilles gets to where the tortoise started from, the tortoise has moved on a bit. When Achilles gets to where the tortoise now is, the tortoise will have moved on a bit more. When Achilles gets to where the tortoise now is, the tortoise will have moved on a bit more, and so on and so on. Therefore, Achilles never catches the tortoise. We're dealing with lengths that become infinitesimally small, and the problem is to do with how you manage with those.
One of Zeno's paradoxes that I like even better is the paradox of Achilles crossing the stadium. And what Zeno said here is that Achilles couldn't even cross the stadium to reach the other side, because before he crossed the entire distance, he would have to cross 1/2 the distance. But before he could reach the halfway point, he would have to reach a point a quarter way across the stadium. But before he could get to the quarter way point, he would have to reach the 1/8 way point, and so on to infinity, so that Achilles could never even move, because before he could even move any distance at all, he would already have to have traversed half of the distance, and therefore Achilles would be literally paralyzed in place, unable to move any distance whatsoever if space and time were composed of these indivisible instants or moments.
Theologian Dr. William Lane Craig. Of course, these notions that Zeno introduced are clearly absurd, but they paved the way for the infinite to be openly discussed. In fact, paradoxes are littered throughout infinity. Consultant psychiatrist Dr. Raj Persaud.
I think that the notion of infinity is fascinating and attracts us and intrigues us for many reasons. One theory is that the notion of the infinite creates some fascinating paradoxes. For example, it is said that it is at the level of the infinite, or infinity, is the place where opposites come together, or contradictions cease to occur. So, for example, if you think about a straight line as being the opposite of a curved line or a circle, then it is said that a circle with an infinite radius actually becomes a straight line. So a circle and a straight line become the same thing at the level of the infinite. So these interesting paradoxes fascinate us about the infinite.
It's not just scientists, philosophers and mathematicians who are fascinated by the infinite. Infinity has been represented in the arts throughout time. The English poet and artist William Blake was one such advocate of the infinite.
To see a world in a grain of sand, and a heaven in a wild flower. Hold infinity in the palm of your hand, and eternity in an hour.
This is the music of William Basinski. In his Disintegration Loops, he played out a series of endless musical loops that he created in the 70s until the tape containing them started to wear away, disintegrating into nothingness. A metaphor for the universe? We may be unsure about the universe being infinitely big, but is it possible to have infinitely small? Professor Paul Davies again.
Mathematicians have no difficulty in thinking of space as continuous and therefore infinitely subdivisible. And most of the history of physics has assumed that there will be no lower limit to the amount that one could chop things up, whether it's an interval of space or pieces of matter. But in the last 100 years or so, it's become clear that there is actually a fundamental unit of distance and a fundamental interval of time, which sets a sort of natural limit inside which we can't probe. This is known as the Planck length and the Planck time, and to put the numbers in, the Planck length is about 20 powers of 10 smaller than an atomic nucleus. So that's exceedingly small, much, much smaller than any of the structures we've probed today.
There's a crucial historical link between an infinite universe and the heavens. Early civilizations decided that anything they could not explain was probably divine. The universe became the heavens where the gods lived, and the inexplicable origins of existence were more to do with the whim of the gods, just like fate, love, death, and life itself. But what does modern religious thinking believe?
When we talk about God's infinity, this is a non-mathematical concept. It's a non-quantitative concept. It is, if you will, a qualitative concept. God is qualitatively infinite, but he's not quantitatively infinite, because God is not composed of an infinite number of definite and discrete, finite items. He's not a collection of things. And I think that the notion of God's infinity basically captures the idea of God's absolute perfection. We mean that God is, as Anselm put it, the greatest conceivable being. And so the infinity of God cashes out in terms of things like his omnipotence, or being all-powerful, his omniscience, or being all-knowing, his omnipresence, or being everywhere active, his being eternal, necessary, and self-existent, his being morally perfect. These would be these qualitative concepts that are involved when one speaks of the infinity of God.
Infinity is just that limitless quality of the mind, and within that limitless quality of the mind, everything arises.
Lama Zangma is head of the London Tibetan Buddhist Center.
When we talk about infinity or voidness, we mean great clarity, great wisdom, great compassion as well, arising out of that. If we talk about space, we think it's infinite. And our mind is often compared to space, because this is how, as a Buddhist, you would relate to infinity in a way. It doesn't matter if the universe is endless. What does it matter to us? What matters to me really is my mind, what I'm experiencing here and now, what everybody, all of us, we feel and how we live our life. But what you often have is this comparison with our mind and space, saying space is limitless, it's infinite, totally limitless. Sometimes as Buddhists we wonder, how can the scientists be so naive to think that, there's a limit to space, there's a limit to the universe. There's going to be an end. If there's an end, there's a beginning. If there's one universe finishing, there'll be another one starting.
The philosopher Nietzsche said that there's a very interesting implication if we believe that time is infinite, which is that if time really is infinite, and if all possible events, though very large, are probably finite, then it logically follows that everything repeats. In other words, every event in the universe returns again and again and again over infinite time. And this is an idea that was captured by the Hollywood blockbuster movie Groundhog Day, where a character in that film relives the same day over and over and over again. And Nietzsche's idea of infinite repetition is fascinating. It means, for example, that the listener to this broadcast has heard this before at an infinite moment sometime in the past, and will hear it again at some infinite moment sometime into the future.
In an